Hello, everyone. For this week's discussion, we are to talk about a social, economic, or environmental justice issue and in rural communities and how we would address that one. And according to our code of ethics, we are to promote social justice and we have a responsibility to society to do that. And so the social justice issue that I would like to talk about is housing and the lack of affordable housing in rural areas. And I have some examples to share with you all. Uh, Housing ties into our social work core values, looking at service and worth of the person, in dignity, integrity, all those things tie into helping people find adequate housing. And as social workers, we want to look at the worth of the person and help everyone to have adequate housing. It's so important. Some rural areas have no shelters and very few affordable living situations, like apartments or even houses to rent, that sort of thing. Even mobile homes to rent, very, very expensive. I worked with a person in the past who lived in a very rural area. There were no really resources for housing, no shelters in this area. And this person had lived in a barn, lived in a friend's garage, lived in their vehicle. And when they were living in their vehicle, they got frostbite pretty badly because of extremely cold temperatures. So, when working in rural areas like this, the social worker needs to keep in mind that it's sometimes difficult for people in these rural areas to accept help. We always want to look at our clients from the person and environment perspective. And for the example that I was just talking about, the person who had lived in their vehicle, they did have a housing option available, but it was about an hour away from where they were from. And so the person refused this because they said it was too far away from their home, even though they didn't have a physical home to live in at that time. That's where they were from. And they continued to live wherever they could, which made caring for their health conditions even more difficult. And so this is just one of many examples that I could give in looking at adequate housing and the people who that directly affects. And what would I do to change this? Well, that's an overwhelming question to me. There's lots of work that needs to be done in this area. I mainly work on a micro level, one on one with people, many people who are struggling to find housing almost every day. So, in my job, I look at individuals where they are and what might be the best option for them at this time. I try to respect their decisions, even when I don't agree with them or when I think I might have a better plan. Our Christianity and Social workbook talks on page 127 about how workers sometimes have a desire to save the poor rather than stand in solidarity with them and try to change systems or structures that create conditions that are difficult. And I want to stand with my clients. I'm not there to save them, but to respect and work with them. On a macro level, there needs to be changes as well, of course. Um, and I have an example that I'm going to share that is pretty inspirational to me, showing what one person can do on a larger level. In a town that's about 45 minutes from where I live, there are very few services for homeless people there. However, they do have a pretty large unhoused population in that area. And so at one time, there was only one pretty small shelter there. And there was a couple, a man and his wife, and they saw this need and said, what can we do to work on this, to address this? And so they worked with the town, they got volunteers together, they gathered resources, and now they have a very active and very welcoming day center for people. And they are in the process of working out the legalities to have a shelter where people can stay overnight. People are not allowed to sleep overnight in the building that they're in, so it's not an option where they're at now. They got the whole community on board, and when Hurricane Helene came through, they were a major hub for resources for people, and not just people in their community, but people in other communities. They provided food, clothing, heaters, tents, sleeping bags, and they allowed even where I work to come and get resources for people, even if people didn't live in that county, which was great. Um, so seeing this need and addressing it in this way to impact a rural community, I think is pretty incredible. Um, And in the textbook, Christianity and Social Work, it talks about how social workers may find inspiration to work on behalf of the poor. And I personally love the way that my spiritual beliefs tie into social work practice. It is my desire to follow Jesus and do my best to love people, love them well wherever they are and whatever they're going through. The book also talks about Pope Francis and his impact on social work. He addressed issues that social workers deal with every day, like racial inequality, immigration, economic injustice, criminal justice. And it's important for me to also look at these issues in light of my faith. In the book on page 122 talks about how Christian leaders, alongside the profession of social work, have to prioritize the role of justice as core to their belief system. And there was an example of what St. Augustine said in there, I agree with, about the source of justice comes from within, that justice is a connection between an internal faith and an external action. Thank you.